The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Mail. I'm Grace Riley.
And I'm Aaron Jenks.
And we're here at National Harbor. We're at CPAC still, and as we're recording this, we're finishing up the conference. So while you're watching this, the conference will be done, and you'll be able to look at some of the videos that we've been putting out since then. And today we're going to analyze those and break them down a bit. We've been having a really great time at the conference. Aaron, any thoughts?
Yeah, conference has been great. Today's a little gloomy. I think you can see behind us. It's a little rainy on the Potomac. And so coming back and forth from the hotel to the CPAC is a little bit of a mess. But today we spent the majority of our day at CPAC. We got there at 9:30 a.m., 10 a.m., and stayed for the majority of the day. We were just getting back to the hotel. And so we have a lot to talk about. And in general, the atmosphere in CPAC today was a lot more thriving than yesterday. There's a lot more buzz because I really think that you had presidential nominations speak today. You had Nikki Haley talk. A lot of people that ride in the Trump train are coming in because he's talking tomorrow for an event guest. And then even you had former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Yeah, so there were a lot of really great speakers today and coming tomorrow. So definitely the energy is increasing at CPAC, and today we did Man on the Street videos, which you can check out on the YouTube and on social media. We should have a few up by the time that you're hearing this, so be sure to look for those. And we asked some interesting questions to some of the attendees at CPAC, and we found that we were talking to a lot of young people. There were a good amount of young people today where they had a lot of thoughts and were really enthusiastic about conservatism and about being a change in our country.
Yeah, and I'll throw it up to statistics, but comparing this Man on the Street video from last year, the people that we interviewed, I would say, let's say we got like 25 people. We only could run with about half of those people or half of the videos that we took because they were quality videos. This year, it just seemed that almost every single person, I think there was only one that we were not going to use, but every person gave a really quality, great answer, and they knew what they were talking about. They seemed really passionate about what they were talking about, and they seemed happy to be there and happy to be interviewed.
Yeah, so we had a lot of really good conversations today, and we'll go over a few of the questions and our takes on them, and you can go check out some of these good answers that we got walking around CPAC today. So just the first thing to jump into, and we'll talk about some of the more common responses. But
yeah, and these are going to be some of the questions that we asked attendants, but we want to give our kind of take on these questions.
Yeah, so just jumping into it, one of the things that we talked about with people was what they felt the most important and crucial issues were that are facing America today. And obviously that's a question where you can go a lot of different directions with that because on a lot of different levels you can call a lot of things the biggest issue we're facing. So we heard a lot of really interesting responses and a lot of people had really good points, some of those being a lot of people talked about abortion, and the reason for that answer was because of life and the sanctity of life. So they kind of said that starting from the very basics of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if you don't have life, then you can't have anything else. So that's why they thought that was the biggest issue. So at its foundation, I think that's a really good point. And there was a lot of other responses there were some having to do with election integrity, some having to do with communism and understanding leftist policies and why we shouldn't have them implemented and we shouldn't support those leaders. So a lot of really good, interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think my favorite response, and I kind of agree with this, because when I think about this question, there's so many important issues where, okay, if someone throws this to me as a working research, I can get into it, and I'm already motivated to make a positive change on that. But when I kind of just think about politics in general in an American state, and what this one gentleman said that really resonated with me is, okay, how do we kind of put reform into the government, and how do we put reform into how our political parties act within the government? So I think that addresses a lot. One thing, which is, I think the other podcast, it addresses the medium of exchange where we can hold our elected officials accountable. So if we can kind of work into that process, and the one specific he brought up was one vote, one bill voting. And so I really thought that was an interesting topic. Well, I'm not going to spoil it too much, so head over to the video on YouTube, and you could be able to watch that. But I really thought that was a great segment and a good sentiment to have, is that, okay, there is a lot of change that we need to reform within the government and understand how political parties are acting.
Well, exactly. And I think to that point, the sentiment as well was that, yeah, beyond just issues, beyond picking just an issue that's the most important thing, looking at the way that our government is functioning as a whole, because the power should be in the hands of the people, and our government ideally should not be corrupt. And most would agree that they can't trust the government, and it's corrupt, myself included, and you as well. I mean, so, you know, with that considered, looking at, as you're saying, the way that the government is running and making sure that those checks are in place. And with one person who mentioned making sure that the elections are fair. I mean, that's an important point where a lot of Americans don't trust elections. So with that considered, making sure that those are, you know, fair is important. So I think all of that together, looking at the way that our government is operating as a whole and the political climate and the way that people are operating in the political sphere is important.
Yeah, and I'm really motivated by this because it's not a let's redo the whole system. There's a lot of great things about our government, and I'm such a fanboy at times with the political science major of how our government works.
Yeah, and I don't like a lot of things about it, but yes.
But it's the optimism of, okay, we can do better. We can change things and implement systems where we can make things faster, we can make things better, as I said.
Yeah, and that has to be the goal of being optimistic about it, because nothing's really going to happen if we do the opposite, if we're always, you know, so I think the goal should be to make the government smaller and more limited. And going about that, yeah, with optimism and looking at the state of our country now, it's easy to be discouraged and say, well, what can we even do? There's so much power and corruption, but all we can do is, you know, try. All we can do is work hard to make sure that the principles that make America great are preserved.
So taking a step back from that, as we're saying, we're talking about kind of politics as a whole and even our government as a whole. So let's take a step back, and I really want to know, well, we asked this question, I want to know what you think, is looking at the conservative movement, us being Liberty Mail and what we represent, okay, what is a strength and what is a weakness within the conservative movement that we see right now? And that can be either between leaders or just within the grassroots movement.
Yeah, so I think what a lot of people say the weakness has to do with, and I would tend to agree with this, is it has to do with the culture. Because for younger Americans, I think conservatives have done a lot of good things with reaching younger Americans, but at the same time, they're still not really winning that battle. And we can see that with the way that young people voted in the past election. I mean, young people voted at large for candidates on the left. So looking at that, though there are a lot of really good organizations that are for young conservatives and help young conservatives to get excited and, you know, to provide education on issues going on in politics, there's also a very big population of young people who trend more to the left or don't really know much about what's going on in our country. So I think looking at that, conservatives need to understand that they're going to have to meet these young people where they are. They're going to have to, you know, understand the culture that's working against them, because the secular leftist culture, which you see in the forms of, you know, media, of social media, of TV that people are watching, music they're listening to, what influencers are saying, what celebrities are saying, all that is coming into play, and what people are learning in the education system, which trends towards the left. So all of those factors are influential in young people's lives, and conservatives haven't done a good job of keeping the culture in that way. So I think what they need to do is be very aware of that and do better in that area.
Well, here, I'll give you a second to get the other side of that question, but I think you're very right. Then, and it comes back to a saying that I've heard a lot, is even as like political parties, they don't get to choose what the voters care about. The voters get to choose what topics are going to be important and what candidates usually run on. And so, yeah, there is a sense that, okay, the political parties really need to understand that they need to meet us where we're at. And like, I feel like our mission with Liberty Mail is that we're trying to also reach out to our generation, and we know where they are, and we're trying to kind of lead them the other way. And there was a really interesting research that came out from Pew, I think it was, and it was showing that millennials are not staying consistent with the kind of, I think it's a stereotypical thing that, okay, well, when you reach your 30s or 40s, you become conservative. And there's some research showing that millennials are not
Yeah.
not falling into that conservative movement, and they're really just staying liberal.
Yeah, and the whole point of that is you're exactly right, and the statistics are showing that, because it's not about age. It's about the generations. So it's not just, and the same is true for even Christians. The same is true for Christianity and religion. Young people are not going to church as much as they used to. More young people are identifying as religiously unaffiliated than ever. But that's not changing with millennials. They're not starting to go to church more as they get older, because it's a generational thing and it's a generational problem. And a lot of that, I think, is answered by the culture and other things like that, and what, people are prioritizing in their lives. Because, and I think that's something that we need to wake up to as conservatives, because I think it is easy for a lot of people to just say, oh, well, when they get older, they'll realize that's how it's always been. Well, it isn't how it is now, which we're seeing in real time.
Oh, yeah.
That's not what it is. So with that, reaching young people needs to be a priority, especially with all the forces working against them, which where it's hard being at a high school. If you're growing up and you're at a high school and it's politically biased, that kind of, it does, in a sense, I'll say, like, sets you up for failure in a way where you're just constantly being bombarded with all of this, and a lot of people don't even hear the conservative message. And politics shouldn't be in the classroom anyway like that, but in the way that they are, but it is just the way it is right now.
Here, so what do you think the flip side of it? I think we heard a lot of good arguments for there are strengths happening with the conservative movement. What's one that comes to your mind when you think about that?
Yeah, and on the flip side of it, to kind of like play the exact other side, is I do think, again, that the conservative movement has done some really good things for young people. I think that there is a lot of enthusiasm amongst young people. It's just that, it's just that there's still a large amount of young people who are not conservative. So I guess that's my point there. But I think what they have done well, I think conservatives really changed when Donald Trump was president. I think the way that political campaigns were run and the way marketing has happened has changed a lot. And I think a lot of that has been in a good way, as far as, marketing goes and otherwise. So I think, and just, the idea of being less political and not a part of the swamp, I think, is important. But, as far as what they've done well, I would say, again, on the flip side of that, something to do with young people. But what do you think?
Well, just from personal experience, I think there's so many individuals who are personally motivated, and it's out of a place of humility. It's out of a place of wanting to do good, and I think that is so genuine within a lot of people within the movement, and I think that's such a positive at the grassroots movement. That's how you get people excited at the grassroots movement, and that's how you really, I think, change the culture eventually. And so I'm really proud of that, seeing that within CPAC too, and then also in my own experience. And then one other strength that I really think they have is there are a lot of smart people who know what they're talking about, right? There are so many high intellectuals either at these think tanks, and the conservative movement has a really strong grip in D.C. on think tanks. So I think that's a great positive in the movement. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's important then, just for conservatives to stick to their guns, like to just, stand firm in the truth and stand firm in what's right and what is logical and, is supported by evidence, because that's the way it ends up working.
That sounds like a message to the younger generation, does it not?
Well, which is exactly what we're going to get into next.
That was one of the main questions that Grace would end up asking, and I thought that was we got some really good responses out of that, especially from some of the older gentlemen or women that we asked. We didn't ask really the younger generation that question as strong.
Well, I did ask a few. So there's definitely check out the video. There was this one young man that said. He basically said in a message to his peers, you guys need to do your research. You need to be looking into issues and understanding why, you think certain things. And I thought that was a great point from, peer-to-peer in a sense, where he was saying, okay, guys, I understand that you scroll on social media all the time. Well, you shouldn't do that. You should be, doing research into more important things. So I thought that was a really good point from a younger person. But again, from some of the older people that we talked to, there was some great advice. By older, just not in Gen Z. They gave Generation Z some great advice. So you'll definitely have to be on the lookout for that. And
almost, I'll say, from my own personal advice, and to really butcher Plato is that, or not Plato, but to really butcher Socrates is that you know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much information being thrown at, especially our generation growing up on social media, and there's so many different news stories that come out, and so almost have the reference of mind that you do not know what the truth is right now. So like that one young man said, going along with that, take 5 minutes to go at least look up this news story before you let it change your whole aspect of how you think about X, Y, or Z topic.
And Jordan Peterson said too, what you don't know is more important than what you already know. And that's, kind of drawing on that, the understanding of, you don't know everything, and understanding that what you don't know is really important, and you should be looking into things you don't know and trying to always be learning. That's just a general life advice thing even.
And it's a great characteristic, I think, to have that humility, and especially in your 20s, man. Time and time again, when I was, at least as a teenager, I did not believe this, but I so firmly do now, is that every time I'm either at a workplace or a job or I have an internship, is ask as many questions as you can, because these people really understand what's happening in your circles, and they're a great source of wisdom that you can learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And then just off of that, I think, did you get any interesting hot takes? I know that we talked about asking that.
Yeah.
We didn't get around to it as much with time that we had, but...
There wasn't too many crazy outlandish ones. I would actually, there was like none outlandish hot takes. A lot of them were just kind of common sense.
Yeah.
The one that kind of resonated the most was particularly is that what is happening with leadership and the communication between leadership and the grassroots happening in the conservative movement is just non-existent bridge of communication. I think that's pretty accurate.
I think that's accurate as well. Yeah, that certainly is a problem.
So do you have any final conclusions of CPAC that you want to send the listeners away with?
I think CPAC, I think from being here especially and being on the ground, it's always really good to just be in person here and to really see what's going on at the event. But I would say that the general sentiment is that, we need to be as united as we can as conservatives in standing up for policy that's a good idea and advocating for issues, because when we're unified together doing that, we're going to be a lot stronger than if we're all kind of in these different subgroups. So I think at CPAC, that's been evident, where there's a lot of different speakers that have been really great, but we are all, we all should be coming together to stand for the basic foundations of what we believe. And I'm hopeful that the young people that are here are inspired. I think that it was a really great time, and there are a lot of young people here, which is really encouraging always.
And I want to send you away with one thought, is that no matter, take away any preconceived notion that you have right now as a listener of CPAC, because politics, especially more than anything, change so often. And so just like CPAC, let's say you thought it was too libertarian for you, you thought it was too populist over the past couple years. There are so many people that are working from every inch of the country, and they're constantly working to advance what they think is right and what is good within the conservative movement. So throw away your preconceived notions, because you can get a lot of good done being open and being having a great amount of humility working with a lot of people at CPAC.
Yeah, and I think it was a really great event. We enjoyed it for when we were there, and again, I think that it's exciting because, as you said before, optimism is going to be important. So looking towards the future, I think as conservatives, we should be excited for the opportunity we have to reach young people and change their minds, and also just our peers and fellow Americans to save our country and, advocate for policies that will be the best for the American people.
Yeah, for those checking in and viewing this on YouTube, we thank you for looking at this gloomy Potomac River behind us. But for those listening, thank you for checking into what I think has been a pretty upbeat weekend and whole week of CPAC. A lot of excitement, and we appreciate you checking in. I hope these 2 episodes are awesome for you. Please leave any comments you have, and then also be on the lookout for any Man on the Street videos, because there are some really interesting and good quality answers in there. Thank you for tuning in to Liberty Mail, y'all.
Thanks so much.
For more information on the Institute for Faith and Freedom, visit faithandfreedom.com.